At the center of the tangle of pathology is the weakness of the family structure. Wow, that is a direct quote from a 1965 government document. And honestly, it might just be the single line of text that did the absolute most damage to the perception of Black Americans in the 20th century. With just those 14 words, a foundational government report effectively shifted the blame for systemic racism and economic starvation right onto the shoulders of Black families.
I'm so glad you're here today because we are going to conduct a forensic audit of a document that shaped decades of American social policy and, let's be real, still haunts our political discourse today. We're going to examine the 1965 Moynihan Report, and we'll be using evidence-based analysis from scholars like Dr. Dante King and Amos Wilson to understand exactly how pathology became the default diagnosis for systemic failure.
Part 1. Framing the Pathology, the 1965 Thesis.
So the document, officially titled The Negro Family, The Case for National Action, was written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan right as the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passing. What was his actual argument here? Well, Moynihan asserted that centuries of mistreatment had forced Black communities into a matriarchal structure. He explicitly stated that the reversed roles of husband and wife seriously retarded the group's progress. Think about that. He was diagnosing the family unit itself as a core weakness that was driving an inescapable cycle of poverty.
Part 2. The Evidence, a Flawed Framing. Now, you might be asking, what kind of data did he use to make such a massive, sweeping claim? Moynihan focused really heavily on rising out-of-wedlock births, broken homes, and the expanding aid to dependent children welfare programs to diagnose this so-called familial disease. But he critically minimized the missing context. While he did briefly acknowledge high unemployment and the flawed American wage system in his text, his ultimate framing weaponized marital status, and that completely overshadowed the hostile systemic economic deprivation and discriminatory environments that were actually driving those statistics in the first place.
Part 3. The Long-Tail Effects, 1965 Forward. You really have to ask yourself what happens when a country officially decides the problem isn't the system, but rather the people trying to survive it. The fallout is staggering. From 1965 onward, blaming the family legitimized the stripping of social safety nets, which led directly to punitive welfare reform. It fueled the narratives that justified mass incarceration by exploiting the 13th Amendment's loophole, the one that allows slavery as punishment for a crime. And psychologically, as Dr. E. Franklin Fraser noted in our source material, it fueled a deeply toxic respectability politics. This caused segments of the Black bourgeoisie to internalize feelings of inferiority, desperately trying to prove they weren't part of this supposed pathology.
Part 4. A Pattern of Normalization.
The Moynihan Report wasn't just some one-off mistake. To understand its true function, we need to pivot to Dr. Dante King's framework in the 400-year Holocaust. Dr. King asserts that reports like Moynihan's are part of a very deliberate historical pattern. He writes, "The projection of white traits onto Black bodies was purposeful. It alleviated moral culpability." According to King's analysis, framing Black people as devious or pathological is essentially a sociopathic requirement of American culture. It's designed to maintain white innocence while excusing profound systemic harm.
So how exactly does this normalization operate day to day? Well, it involves designing the very concept of criminality around Black bodies. It means exploiting that 13th Amendment loophole we just talked about. And most relevant to the Moynihan Report, it means constantly framing systemic disparities, like a lack of wealth or housing, as individuals' shortcomings or family failures. King argues that the culture literally requires this subjugation to function normally. By constantly pointing the finger at the Black family, this system successfully avoids ever having to look in the mirror.
Part 5. The Structural Counterargument. If Moynihan's diagnosis was just a projection, what is the actual truth? For that, we're turning to Amos Wilson's text, Black on Black Violence, to completely dismantle the Moynihan thesis. Wilson highlights that a societal symptom, such as so-called criminality or family shifting, is erected as an altar upon which the repressed classes are ritualistically sacrificed by the dominant class. Wilson argues that these symptoms just reflect the ruling complex's attempts to maintain their own socioeconomic advantages. They are absolutely not inherent flaws of the oppressed. They are the manufactured outcomes of oppression.
Wilson introduces this powerful concept of a criminogenic society. This is a society where the ruling class creates deeply oppressive conditions. Think containment, economic denial, political disempowerment that inevitably produce the very behaviors the society then turns around and criminalizes. Using Wilson's logic, we can completely reframe Moynihan's idea of the crumbling family. It is not a pathology. It is a profound adaptation, an incredible method of survival, and absolute resilience in the face of a hostile, criminogenic environment that was literally designed to break it.
Part 6. What honesty looked like.
As we wrap up today, what would the 1965 report have actually said if it relied on the facts presented by King and Wilson? Well, according to these frameworks, an honest report would have flat out stated that the system is functioning exactly as designed. It would have indicted psychopathic systems of economic and social starvation, concluding that the pathology lies in structural white supremacy, not in the black family. Instead of trying to fix the victims so they could fit into a broken society, an honest report would have demanded an absolute overhaul of the ruling class and its institutions.
Which leaves us with this final thought to carry with you. What if the policy failure was never the family, but the system itself? As policy-minded learners, it is our responsibility to deeply scrutinize the foundational reports we still rely on today, to unlearn those ingrained biases, and to boldly ask the questions the original authors were too afraid to ask. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.
Hey there, glad you stopped by. If you're feeling the vibe, stick around for a little while. Don't forget to like and subscribe, like and subscribe.